Quite frankly, some of the commenters on my videos, especially during US election years, kinda glow in the dark. If you understood what I meant, then you're a far-right extremist ready to kill government officials in Minecraft. That is, according to a Russian-born author from The Atlantic. You know, the same rag that tried to convince you there was a Russian conspiracy to put Donald Trump in office now publishes legit Russian conspiracies. Well, not really, it's more like a Russian drivel, and the only reason worth looking at it is for educational purposes. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so let's discuss those who glow in the dark, or those who fly, or those sewn into the story with phosphorescent thread. We'll explain in a few minutes what all of these mean. So, the subject of study is an article that was supposed to be in a World SOFA report, but ultimately decided against it due to time constraints and also because there is some educational value in dissecting this particular piece of propaganda. The article is written by Olga Khazan, staff writer at the very left-wing magazine The Atlantic, one of the few places in the English language where the left is fully honest with its intentions, which is precisely why you should read it more often and glow in the dark in their own forums. Now, Olga is born in Russia and has wrote a book about being weird. She's basically like a 4chan autist, but on the left. So, in other words, a Russian conspiracy theorist. So the article is titled "The Far-Right's Fear of Glowies," and it is written like most pieces are written in the modern so-called press. Disingenuous title, outright falsehoods in the first few paragraphs, mostly true things and glimpses of reality in the middle and towards the end of the article, and then full delirium right at the end of it. It's pretty long, so I definitely won't read it in its entirety, but there are portions of it that are unbelievably terrible, even by the Atlantic standards. So, let's read. Quote, "Judging by the actions of those who stormed the Capitol, far-right extremists don't fear arrest, but they do fear one thing: glowies. During the Trump administration, many far-right groups' main concern was figuring out how to recruit more people to the cause. But as federal law enforcement officials continue to round up people suspected of involvement in the event at the Capitol, and Joe Biden's administration promises a crackdown on white supremacists and anti-government radicals, extremists are on the verge of a crack-up, posting widely and worriedly about spies in their midst. Glowies. That's the term far-right groups are used to describe people they suspect of being federal law enforcement agents or informants infiltrating their communication channels, trying to catch them plotting violence or prodding them into illegal acts. The term is in widespread use amongst extremists. On January 6, one Telegram user made their channel, which was popular with the far-right, private because of nameless, faceless glowings are joining. 2 days later, another person suggested that glowies would float dead cop story to redirect public attention and sympathy. One user recommended downloading an alternative platform, ZeroNet, saying glowies cannot take it down. I found variation on the glow terminology all over 5chan and the Donald.win, the far-right successor of the pro-Trump subreddit r/the_Donald. Extremists have become more wary of real or perceived glowies since January 6. On the January 11, someone on 4chan asked, "What kind of shit should I get for the Boogaloo?" meaning the civil war the far-right Boogaloo boys are preparing for. This, another person responded, seemed like glow, the potential sign of an FBI agent. The same thing happened when another user asked about the best advice about the best place to store guns. On the Donald.win, someone suggested that the death of Ashley Babbitt, the woman killed during the Capitol riot, was possibly staged or orchestrated by glowies. Since all of you glowies are here looking for domestic terrorists, another wrote, "Look in the mirror, then apologize for Ruby Ridge to you sick fucks," referring to an 1992 siege by US Marshals in Idaho that led to the deaths of 3 people. With increased content moderation by platforms and tons of researchers and analysts paying more attention to the right, it appears these folks want to keep the momentum of the 6th going but are afraid to talk about it openly, Conroy told me via email. Federal law enforcement, of course, has a long history of monitoring extremist groups. FBI informants infiltrated both far-left Weather Underground and the KKK, among others. The FBI declined to comment on whether its agents or informants are currently monitoring far-right communications channels or posting in them directly. But federal agents don't have to be actively watching the channels to complicate the extremists' mission. Being watched makes planning harder, so does constant suspicion. The mere possibility of glowies among the militias might be enough to reduce the threat of extremist violence in the coming months. Far-right forums are rife with racism and misogyny, so perhaps it's no surprise that glowy derives from the language of hate. The term originated with Terry Davis, a computer programmer who had schizophrenia and harbored paranoid conspiracy theories about the government. In a 2017 YouTube video that has been viewed nearly 1 million times, Davis says the CIA niggers glow in the dark, you can see them if you're driving, you just run them over, end quote. Because the internet can be a terrible place, the term took off, becoming popular on Half-Chan's white nationalist poll board and spreading to other platforms. Glowy has also sprouted other permutations. Someone who seems suspicious is said to be glowing, seeming too much like an FBI agent, known as Alphabet in these forums, and is called glow posting. For instance, asking a question like, do you know where I can get schematics for 3D printed guns, might be considered glow posting because it suggests that the user is attempting to lure his interlocutor toward committing a crime, says Hampton Stoll, a senior researcher at the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project and the founder of the Militia Watch blog. So basically an activist, no one cares what he says. If someone is suspected of being a federal agent or an informant to the FBI, other group members will Fed jacket him or her, making the case about why the person is secretly a snitch. To prevent feds from joining, some forums have devised elaborate vetting procedures. For instance, they'll ask potential members to send a picture of one of their biceps on the theory that a reverse image search will reveal whether the picture is original. Also, they're very bro-y, Stoll told me. Then there's glowing, which is talking about things that are violent or threatening, and therefore likely to attract the attention of cops. In a chat on the Element Messenger app that Conroy is in, people have asked, for example, how brightly are we allowed to glow here? Or as part of a conversation about the apparent desire to execute members of Congress, one user said, yeah, I'd say every single Congress critter needs to go. That's my kind of glowing right here. Another user responded, close quote. Now, first of all, this is funny because it continues to prove just how behind these people are. So Olga here presents this as news. Now here's some reality. First of all, the term glow nigger may have originated from the 2017 video she's mentioning, but the idea of glowing in the dark or similar analogies has been around for much longer. For instance, in my native tongue, if you want to suggest that something, especially a story, really doesn't add up or is fishy, you would say it is sewn with white thread or with phosphorescent thread. The phrase, of course, is not meant literally, just like nobody believes FBI agents literally glow in the dark, but metaphorically. The sense being that the hidden structure is in fact not so hidden because it's white or on dark or phosphorescent. And the metaphor is about 200 years old. And it's being used in the context of spies since at least the 1850s in my neck of the woods. In China, for instance, if one wants to refer to Russian spies, one calls them hui, which under certain tonems means the light of the sun, which glows. While at the same time, hui in Russian means dick, a fact of which many Chinese people are aware. So basically, the alleged Russian spy becomes a glowing dickhead, essentially hu yi, which in Chinese also means to glow. See my point, what I'm trying to say here? And if you look hard enough, most languages have some analogy between glowing and spying or impersonating or something or someone not being what it or they may seem to be. I mentioned earlier those who fly, which is a euphemism for the term bird watcher, which is literally the term British intelligence officers use for themselves. They don't call themselves glowies, but bird watchers. And those who despise them call them flyers. Now, admittedly, I haven't seen that term in particular used lately, but it was very common in 1999 or 2000 on many of these marginal forums. And here's another aspect in which Olga is being inexact. Judging by her age, I wouldn't accuse her necessarily of lying. She may legit not know many of this. Her article portrays this as something new. It isn't. Marginal forums on the internet rife with both extreme rhetoric and euphemisms for infiltrators have been a thing since at least 1995. I mean, that's when I became aware of them, but I'm pretty sure they're as old as the internet itself. Just like euphemisms have been a thing since the very notion of language came into being. One thing is certain though, whilst Olga may have no idea about the older story, taking an euphemism literally is pretty deliberate, and in line with the editorial line at The Atlantic, which she is merely a staff writer, which means she can be out of the job if she doesn't toe the line or if she steps out of the line. And when an euphemism can't be taken literally, unless you seriously want to suggest that the so-called far-right literally believes the FBI agents glow in the dark, then the next best thing is to forcibly associate it with something bad. Let us take an example from the Russian language so Olga can understand it and show just how this works. So let's take the phrase «каждый прочит, как он хочет», which means everyone jerks off however he wants. Now, if you have a thick skull, you may suggest that this is about techniques of masturbation. However, with a slightly more open mind, it's easy to figure out that the phrase has nothing to do whatsoever with masturbation, but it's merely a vulgar way of saying to each his own. Is that clear enough? Because this aspect is quite important for one simple reason. If you can't grasp euphemisms, then you're gonna have a bad time in the coming years, as the political lingo, both on the right and on the left, gets more and more complicated. All right, so now on to the disingenuousness of the title, the far-right's fear of glowies, which in addition to downplaying the existence of glowies, it also implies that it's an issue specific to the far right. Well, it's not. On far-left forums, they're called snitches and pigs, and sometimes glowies as well, although the term is indeed discouraged in extreme left circles. The fact of the matter is that infiltration is a thing, and not just by state agents, as Olga admits later on in the article, but also by competing groups. Also, sometimes a state agent might join not to infiltrate, but to prop up and help. Again, an aspect admitted by Olga, but very deep in the article, very hard to find if you're only reading the story at a glance. In other words, the situation is a lot more nuanced than glowies man, conspiracy theorist man bad. Okay? And then Olga shows us that although she has the facts from people who know better than her, and she even cites those, quite incorrectly though, she then ends the article in a fashion more appropriate for Tumblr. By the way, remember Tumblr? Anyway, so as I'm saying, she wraps up the article in a fashion that is more appropriate to various marginal blogs than a serious propaganda outlet that The Atlantic proclaims itself to be. She says, quote, "But even if federal agent infiltration doesn't lead to any arrests, it might serve another useful purpose. These extremist groups, which were already predisposed to paranoia, now have something to be paranoid about. Real or perceived glowies are putting a healthy fear into these groups, which thrive on the premise that they're on the right side of history. It's humbling to go from being a well-regarded CEO to being judged a criminal and a terrorist. These days, the Capitol rioters may be thinking, as Clark put it, I have all this privilege and I might have just thrown a lot of it away. The white men at the apex of American society don't fear much, but they do fear falling to the bottom," close quote. It's amazing, really, how much money and time has been spent, invested over the last 50 or 60 years in studying, infiltrating, and monitoring extremism, and yet they still don't understand anything. Quite amazing, really. Here, free advice. Nobody on the so-called far right thinks in terms of privilege. Nobody. And not because the privilege narrative is haram even in mainstream right-wing circles, but because the very point of extremism precludes a pattern of thought in these terms. And the same is true for the far left, by the way. While in mainstream left-wing circles the privilege narrative is bought hook, line and sinker, in far left circles it is strongly disavowed. Why? Because extremism of any kind really relies and thrives on too many things: the subcultural aspect and the victim mentality. The victim mentality can either be in the form of the bourgeoisie is oppressing us, or the communists are oppressing us, or even wild things like shape-shifting reptilians are oppressing us. Which of course is now a meme, but tens of thousands of millions seriously believed that shape-shifting reptilians narrative between 2001 and 2007-ish, and then it started to die out. And that's because of the second aspect, the subcultural aspect. Unless the subculture is updated from time to time, it fizzles out in about a decade. If the subculture is maintained and tendered, if I may, then it lasts about 40-ish years. Then it still fizzles out because, you see, all subcultures have themselves a narrative curve. Anyway, the point is that the privilege narrative, as referred to oneself, simply has no room in extremist thinking, be it leftist, rightist, up, down, whatever. No extremist sees himself or herself as privileged. None. Ever. And claiming otherwise is just wrong. Now, one more thing about this article and then we can wrap this up. Surveillance and even infiltration by state actors into groups deemed of interest is as old as civilization itself. To claim that this is somehow peculiar to far-right groups is just wrong. In fact, it's not even specific to legit extremist groups. A lot of very vanilla groups get infiltrated all the time, and the definition of interest varies quite wildly from country to country. It can be left-wing environmental groups, like it is in the United Kingdom these days. It can be churches and meditation schools, like it is in China. It can be mosques, like it is the case in France and Germany these days. It can be gaming forums, like it is the case now in Russia. So not only it is reasonable to ask about and be wary of those who may glow in the dark, but it is reasonable no matter what your activity is. Sure, Olga Khazan calls it paranoia, but anyone who's been through a setting like this should know that only the paranoid survive. Heck, Olga herself should know. She's born in the USSR, and the only reason she's alive is because her parents were paranoid. But that's also the good news. For every Anne Applebaum, which is a very experienced left-wing propagandist that also writes for The Atlantic, there are 10,000 Olga Khazans on the professional chattering left who really have no idea what they're talking about, and that difference is glowing. The circumstance may look good for leftists, but the trend doesn't. Now, admittedly, the trend also favors extreme leftist ideas, but, you know, such is life. You can't stop an idea whose time has come, and that's what terrifies people like Olga Khazan, as well as other more capable loons who opine about these things as if it's 1970. But that's a story for another day. That's all I had to say. With all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, visit our website, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.